Welcome to Walking Through Mark number 12. It is this time. Thank you for watching, and may God bless my speaking of things pertaining to His Word, and bless your hearing as you listen and consider this along with me. We are in Mark chapter 7, verse number 24. If you'd like to find that place and read along, you're welcome. I'm reading from the New King James Version. I don't know if I've ever said that up to now, but in case you're wondering what translation I'm using, I'm reading from the New King James Version, Mark chapter 7, beginning in verse 24. From there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, "Let the children be filled first, for it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." And she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For this saying, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter." And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out, and her daughter lying on the bed. Well, another one of the stories, true story, of course. When I say stories, I don't mean they're made-up stories. They're true. True stories or incidents in the life of Jesus that Mark records. On this occasion, Jesus goes out of Israel, out of the region, to a neighboring area. Tyre and Sidon are towns or cities. Phoenicia is the region, and it's a neighboring area. We'd say to get away for a while. That's how we might put it in our own common way of wording it. To get away for a while, but he couldn't get away. I mean, he was wanting to be away for a bit for whatever reason. We can speculate, but I won't. I'll just say he wanted to get away for a little while, but couldn't stay concealed or hidden, unknown that he was there. And a woman in particular, and it's stated by Mark specifically, so we don't miss it. She was a non-Jew. She was Gentile. She was Greek. She was Syrophoenician by birth. So she's not a proselyte convert, we'd say, to the Jewish religion. She is an outsider. That's important. You might say, well, so Jesus, loved people that were not his native people, the Jews. And, well, that's probably not the main point being made. It is true, by the way, that he loved people that were not his fellow Jews, his kinsmen, and such like. But the point being made here, I think, is that Jesus is doing a good work for her, or her daughter in particular, but in a favor to the mother. And she's not Jewish. That would help us too, by the way, what I've just said, to better understand what seems to be a derogatory remark, which I suggest is not derogatory, at least not in an evil sense. It has a negative sound to it when he says it's not good to take the bread off the table and give it to dogs, that kind of thing. Or at least for sure depriving children of their food so the dogs might have to eat and such like. That saying may have been just that, a saying, or if it's not a saying, he sure made one here when he worded it that way. And the point I'm wanting to emphasize is how this really affected the woman. It could have been easily a put off. It could have been, "Call me a dog, will you?" and so forth. But her humble response of well, crumbs even fall off the table and no one objects that the dogs, lap that up and so forth. And it says, Mark says that he indicated to her, "For this saying," which reflects what's in her heart. In fact, I can't help but think when he says "for this saying," implied is because of the way you have responded by saying that, go, your daughter's well. He Jesus, in God's arrangement, in the whole execution of the gospel plan, was sent to the Jews first and then later it will be to the Gentiles. And we don't read too much about that, of course, until the book of Acts. But even here, preliminarily, or in prospect, in advance, we see that it's going to not just be for the Jews alone that the gospel comes, or Jesus, if you want to use his name, that Jesus comes. The benefits of Christ is for the whole world, and you see this here in an early way prior to his even dying on the cross and establishing the kingdom and the beginning of all of that's recorded in the book of Acts. Oh, and one more thing. I just glanced again at the text before we read on. Notice also how Jesus never lays eyes on the daughter. He just says, basically, go home. She's well. When she gets home, she's well. I said in a previous walking through Mark lesson, I indicated Jesus could have any morning he wanted to awakened and said, okay, everybody's well in the whole world. In all of Israel, or however he wishes to do it. It's not necessary that he goes and speaks over a person or waves his hand over them, makes some sort of demonstration of healing. He can just will it to be so. And it's amazing how that he has that kind of power, not only to heal someone not seen or not touched or not spoken over, but to will it for a particular person in a particular house, not where he's at, and there's no mistake about it. In other words, she won't go home and say, well, I guess he missed maybe I gave him the wrong address or something. he wasn't acting on someone giving him the proper address and I'll see if I can send a healing to her. It's just willing it to be so. It's amazing. This is super amazing stuff. Okay, let's read some more. This is verse number verse 31, verse 31. Again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. We'd say he went back home. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude, put his fingers in his ears, and he spat, and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephata, that is, be opened. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one, but the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he's done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. It's astonishing. Mark continues to record various incidents that Jesus encountered. He's recording mainly Jesus as a man of deeds. And how does it conclude? He's done all things well. He's a doer. He's a worker. It's true. He's a great philosopher, a great teacher, a great rabbi, and all of that. That's true too. And he's a great example, a miracle worker. Well, that's probably the miracle worker part would be included in some of this. And but anyway, that's Mark's gospel account emphasis. Here we also see just the opposite of what I was saying in the previous story, how that Jesus did not need to lay his hands on someone to heal them, to see them with his own eyes, to say some words over them. We've even had people going through a crowd and just touching his garment, and immediately power goes out to heal the person, as if he knows in his mind. In fact, not as if, he knows in his mind, here in these hundreds of people is coming a lady. She's coming through the crowd. Here she comes. Okay, she touched my garment. I'm now going to heal her. It's amazing. I don't know how much better, I'm not trying to better, say it. It's amazing. It's astonishing. And people are just, we'd say in a casual way, blown away by all of this that he's able to do. But anyway, I sort of lost my point. Back to the point I'm making, contrary to that I've just said, he, though on occasion, does make quite the spectacle of it, quite the visible impression of a miracle taking place. Just to review, he puts his finger, Jesus puts his fingers in the man's ear, he spits, he touches his tongue, he cries out to heaven, Ifata, which means, Mark has to translate that, which means be open, and all of that. In fact, I'll start with a question. Why do all of that? It's not necessary. We already know it's not necessary. So why do all of that? It has to be for the people that are witnessing it. That's my only conclusion. You're welcome to come up with one of your own, but that's the only conclusion I can come up with. It's not required by Jesus. I can't do a miracle unless I can see who it is I'm doing a miracle on, or unless I can touch him or anything like that. So it must be for the person being healed or witnesses to it being healed. And we are just very weak creatures of the dust. We are weak people, and often we need visible signs or visible evidences. Reminds me of later how in the gospel story, I think John records it if I have the location of scripture right, talks about Thomas. We call him Doubting Thomas. He wanted to see the proof that Jesus had arisen. So we are the ones that are benefited by some of this, I think. Okay, I think we have time for one more segment of reading. This begins another chapter, chapter 8, but if you wish to listen carefully or read along with me more, we'll do one more segment before we stop for today. This is chapter 8, verse 1. In those days, the multitude being very great, having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they'll faint on the way, for some of them have come from afar. Then his disciples answered him, How can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And they set them before the multitude. They also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. Immediately got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. We've heard this story before, haven't we? Earlier, it wasn't long before. I mean, it could have been, in days, weeks, or months. It could have been months before. But we've heard the story not too long ago in our reading, how that he fed, I think it was 5,000 men, if I remember the number, and it was 12 baskets left over. Anyway, it's a very similar kind of story, very similar, but it appears to be different. This is, I would say, absolutely different, because Mark records the earlier one and this one, so we don't have to wonder, are we confusing the same one by reading it twice? It's a different one. And I've got a couple thoughts, and I'll close for today. How could they so easily forget what had happened prior, even if it was a few months before? Such a spectacular thing as healing people like they did. How could they have forgotten that, assuming they are, or some of them there are those who were there previously when he did a similar thing? But we're just very forgetful people. It's I don't know, as great a memory as we sometimes have about things, it's also just as amazing what we forget. And then another thing I wanted to mention too is how Jesus pauses before eating. Now, this is not the Lord's Supper. It may sound similar, but it's not. This has fish and bread, and this is what we'd call a common everyday kind of meal. And he pauses to thank God for it, which he's providing miraculously. He's thanking the Father himself. He's providing, blessing, if you will, of the food, thanking God for the food. Let me check again and make sure I have this just right. He sat them down, it says, and he gave thanks. That's all Mark says in verse 6, gave thanks. I was looking for the exact wordage. He gave thanks. Well, I just don't know that there's any way we can find a way around. Not that we're looking for one, but I'm just saying no way we would be excused for not doing similarly. And we're not providing it miraculously. But when we're eating, and I don't mean necessarily if you have a piece of candy in your hand and you put it in your mouth, you need to pause and thank God first, although nothing wrong with that. But I'm talking about for sure when we're eating for our strength, for our nourishment, for our meals, there's no way that I would want to do that without giving thanks. Whether it's silently within yourself, expression of it with words, uh, verbalizing, or sharing the words with others if there are others eating with you. Jesus leaves us a great example here. And in another place of the Bible, we're taught that food is acceptable if accepted or received with thanksgiving. We must recognize God as the giver of our daily bread. In fact, everybody knows the so-called Lord's Prayer, one part of which reads, "Give us this day our daily bread." When it comes to the basic essentials of life, our being sustained with our food and clothes, we need to thank God. We need to thank God for even the most basic of everyday needs. Okay, I think I'll stop there. Another great story, though, recorded of Mark, or by Mark, of the life of Jesus. Look forward to next time. Thank you.